We got one down and a few more to go. And many whites hoped and prayed that Negroes would stop conquering Atlanta after they fought to put an end to the segregated buses. But that wasn't in their plans. They planned to go after more. And next on their hit list were the parks and recreational facilities, which can seem insignificant at first until we understand that it was the principle behind it that really mattered. Okay? So we're continuing our studies from the 2005 book White Flight by Dr. Kevin Kruse. Prudence. The anger of working-class whites over the loss of bus lines was nothing compared with their outrage over the desegregation of Atlanta's municipal parks. Unlike the buses, which had always been contested terrain, these public spaces had been reserved for whites since the days of Reconstruction. Reconstruction was the period after the Civil War from 1865 to 1877. It's when the Southern society was rebuilt after slavery ended in order to keep power in white hands. So since that time, whites had reserved certain public spaces for themselves. Indeed, it was only after the First World War that the city established any colored park space at all. That's after 1918. So approximately 4 decades to get something that belongeth to Negroes. The distribution of recreational facilities, the report pointed out, was just as bad. There were 96 tennis courts in the city, for instance, but blacks could only play on 8, none of which was lighted, and Negroes needed the light so they wouldn't be stuck in darkness. The city ran 8 community centers, but blacks could use just one. Likewise, only one of the city's 7 gyms admitted blacks. The most glaring discrepancy in the distribution of these services, however, stood in the municipal golf courses. Pay attention, because the golf course was where black leaders found a glitch in the system to capitalize on. While blacks had at least some access to other sites, they were barred completely from the city's 5 golf courses. Nearly 250,000 white golfers visited these courses a year. But if Atlanta's blacks wanted to play around, they had to haul their equipment beyond the city limits to the privately owned Lincoln Country Club, which some of them got tired of doing. Now, on July 19, 1951, there was a group of blacks who tried to get a game going at Bobby Jones Municipal Golf Course. It was a physician, his son, and there were 2 other gentlemen with them. They were a respectable middle-class group. However, as the Golf Pro pointed out, they were also black, and being labeled that in the racial worldview was no bueno at that time. They could have been the most respectable people on the planet, but as soon as it was discovered that they were black, it became a problem. Because of that detail, he refused to let them play, citing a city ordinance barring blacks from public areas designated for whites. Because for whiteness to have any real social meaning, it depended on blackness to be kept inferior, by not allowing those tagged as blacks to have the same opportunities. And that went for places that they could live in, could eat at, could shop at, and could socialize. That's what the racial lens has always promoted since its colonial conception. Right? Now, after the group of 4 were rejected because of their black status, the physician, Dr. Hamilton Holmes, he filed a lawsuit with the federal government, and he demanded that all Atlanta's courses be open to blacks. Although Judge Sloan found in favor of the black plaintiffs, he left room for continued separation of the races. Segregation, the Atlanta Journal assured its readers, can be maintained. The judge essentially claimed that the city had no obligation to operate courses at all. And that's what left room to imply that the courses could just be shut down, and that would apparently solve the Negro problem. Black leaders, however, were not satisfied. Several of the NAACP's leading legal minds, including Thurgood Marshall and Robert Carter, were brought on board to handle the appeal. Emboldened by Brown, they pressed the case to the Supreme Court in hopes that the justices would strike down any semblance of segregation. And what happened? On November 8, 1955, the court did just that. In a ruling of just 58 words, the justices decided unanimously that lower courts had been wrong to apply the separate but equal doctrine to public facilities. Again, all of these rulings are what was caging off the supremacy entity, because reality was making room for a new age. It was slowly closing off the old lanes so it could open up the new ones, like we're moving through right now and into the future. That's just how it works, right? Nothing lasts forever. Everything has its rise and its fall. Kingdoms rise and they fall. Economies rise and they fall. Businesses rise and fall. Celebrities reach their peak, then they come down, right? Trends come into style and then they fall out. Ideologies like white supremacy also follow the same trend once they run their course on the world stage. And what we've been studying since colonial times was the rise of it. And then after the Civil War, we see the slow but steady fall of it, as we're seeing here. Blacks had to be admitted to Atlanta's golf courses on a completely equal basis. Anytime you hear equality of white and black, then you should understand that this is a telling sign that the supremacy is going further into a decline. The idea of whiteness was built during the colonial era on having large gaps between those labeled as whites and non-whites. The larger the gap, the more valuable whiteness was in the society. Meaning, if I'm white and I have all the rights and privileges and everyone else gets none of those, then it opens up a gateway for me to feel superior, right? Just like some people feel some sense of superiority when they get to board first class on the plane. It's the experience of getting to do something or having access to something that others don't that summons the superiority entity from within. And we all have it, right? Or at least the potential of it. But if all of a sudden they remove the first class boarding and those people have to board with everyone else, then what happens? They don't get the feeling, right? And it created the same effect once blacks got to vote, once they got to move where they wanted, and once they got to play on the same golf courses. Segregationists were outraged, as expected. Blacks did not want equality, they charged. They wanted social intimacy.
They do not want to play on golf courses where only Negroes are playing. They want to play with white men and women, and they are determined to force themselves on the white players.
And that was true for some blacks for sure. And whites were professionals at spotting the ones who were. But other Negroes just wanted to play on the courses. Or they wanted to break up the white congregation. Unwilling to let municipal spaces be integrated, they instead urged the city to abandon its public lands altogether. Talmadge, for instance, suggested the city sell its parks and playgrounds to private interests who could keep them white, which sounded good in theory, but Talmadge wasn't the one that was running the show. It was Mayor Hartsfield. And to do something like that would not have looked good for the city.
Atlanta has a good reputation before the nation, and we hope to preserve it. I have no doubt that Atlanta, as usual, will do the right thing.
Hartsfield listed similar southern cities that had already desegregated courses without trouble, and reminded whites that other public facilities, such as playgrounds and swimming pools, would still be segregated. But for how long? That's the question. Following Hartsfield's recommendations, the same group that had first sought to play golf on the Bobby Jones course 4 years earlier announced they would finally play the next day. The colonists were turning all the way over in their Virginia and Georgia graves at this point, because Negroes kept winning. Although the desegregation seemed to go smoothly, whites in neighborhoods near the courses were outraged. But when desegregation really did arrive, the North Side News interpreted it as a personal attack.
There are 7 public golf courses in Atlanta.
They pointed out.
Only 2 are in the North Side, the other 5 being much more convenient to the Holmes boys and their friends who live in Southwest Atlanta.
Blacks had targeted the Bobby Jones and North Fulton courses not because they were the city's finest, the paper charged, but because the
NAACP wants nothing short of all-out war.
war with who? The supremacy entity. The one that was trying to keep them in the pit so it could stay alive within the whites. A big battle in the city streets. The North Side courses had been chosen because they stood in neighborhoods that were still all white.
Under the NAACP strategy,
The editors warned,
the Negro invading forces strike first at the Pearl Harbors and not at the nearby Asiatic islands. The first attack must humble the self-satisfied whites who believe that the Negro problem will never strike close to their homes. That itself is an incident Northsiders need to note.
Negroes coming with hot strategy. Tellingly, the paper charged that the city's moderate coalition would, in time, dismantle segregation in all public spaces. The coalition included Mayor Hartsfield, the white businessmen, and the black leaders.
With a smugness that would be laughable were it not so alarming, the Atlanta Journal declares that the admission of Negroes to white golf courses does not mean that Negroes will be permitted to use the swimming pools with white people. That is like saying the infant who learns to crawl will not learn to walk.
No, the golf courses were just the first step. In less than a year, they warned, the mayor would announce that
He and the merchants welcome the integration of whites and blacks in swimming pools, in all restaurants, on all buses, and maybe in the public schools.
the North Side News reminded whites that many of them had been recently annexed by the city because Hartsfield wanted to suppress the rising percentage of blacks in the population.
The Negroes are taking over the city of Atlanta as it is today. The whites have got to put those Negroes in their place and see that Atlanta continues under a white mayor.
Remember that Hartsfield was tiptoeing on the fence and playing both sides. So he did whatever he could to cater to whites and blacks whenever it was necessary. So when he annexed these other parts of nearby populations of whites into Atlanta in order to keep a white mayor, that was him catering to the whites.
The North Side came to his help. Now the North Side finds Mayor Hartsfield surrendering without even a mild protest. The North Side's playgrounds to the South Side's Negroes he once wanted to keep in their place.
They were disgusted.
That is really the lowest one could expect from an elected Caucasian in the betrayal of public trust.
They felt that he had sold them out for Negroes. But really he did it for his career and the public image of the city. If the mission was to bring in more money and to get a better reputation for Atlanta, and that meant no more promoting or at least openly promoting white supremacy, then that was what needed to be done, and he understood that. White resentment over the desegregation of golf courses, though potentially explosive, never reached a state of true crisis. Whites could, of course, simply refuse to play desegregated courses, but if they did play, they would rarely encounter any black players. As the mayor liked to point out, golf was by nature a segregated game, in which there was little or no contact between groups. With no contact, there could be little conflict. In other spaces of public recreation, however, such as park facilities and swimming pools, the degree of personal contact would be much more pronounced, and, accordingly, so would the resistance of segregationist whites, because the harder you force, the more you open up the gateways for the resistance entity to emerge. And it's coming. And we're going to see that firsthand in the next commentary. So I thank you right now for your time and attention. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael. And I'll see you in the free world.